Congratulations on assuming this task and the importance of the Coast Guard, as you well know. So look forward to working with you. And we've had a good session with our previous chair, and I'm sure it'll be repeated in your tenure as chair of this committee. So welcome and congratulations. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge and welcome Admiral Schultz to the committee for his first opportunity to testify as the 26th Commandant of the Coast Guard. Good morning and welcome. You've sat in that chair before, but in a different role. The Coast Guard has now endured some tumultuous times, especially having to respond and cope with the aftermath of 3 consecutive devastating hurricanes last year, and most recently, Hurricane Florence and the Carolinas. So the Coast Guard's been busy, and your command, here you go. I commend the men and women of the Coast Guard for their stellar response to these disasters and for the unfailing ability to remain semper paratus, always ready. Whenever, wherever, you're always good to go. The Coast Guard also has to contend with other serious challenges, those of human-induced variety, that either diminish or erode the Coast Guard's capabilities and missions readiness. And I'd like to explore some of those this morning. For example, I've advocated for years that to sustain the Coast Guard at a level to meet the demands that we have placed on it, we must invest. We have insufficient investments to ensure that the Coast Guard service members have the assets, the training, and the support they need to get the job done, and done quickly and correctly. Consequently, I commended the administration earlier this year when it requested for the Coast Guard in its fiscal 2018 budget a $1.1 billion or 11% increase over the fiscal 17 enacted level. Considering the administration's abysmal fiscal 2017 budget request, which was a cut of $1.3 billion or 14%, which fortunately didn't happen, I thought that we had turned a corner. I'm not so sure that my optimism was justified and may very well have been premature. Earlier this summer, word leaked out that the administration was looking to transfer funds from agencies within the Homeland Security Department, including the Coast Guard, to Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, in order to fund the administration's highly controversial, if not inhumane, family separation and deportation activities on the southern border. A Transportation and Infrastructure Committee ranking member, Peter DeFazio, and I wrote to OMB Director Mick Mulvaney, urging him in the strongest possible terms to not transfer funds from the Coast Guard and certainly not shortchange the Coast Guard further as the hurricane season was approaching. Well, it appears as though our pleas fell on deaf ears. With no notice to the members of this committee, OMB cut roughly $32.1 million from the Coast Guard's budget, an amount roughly equivalent to the entire Coast Guard budgets for both research and development and environmental compliance and restoration. Admiral Schultz, I want to hear from you where that $32 million came from, what it means to the Coast Guard. Moreover, I will want to learn the impact on your programs. Aside from trying to provide a stable budget for the Coast Guard, the service also must confront new maritime challenges facing our nation as the Arctic warms more quickly, then we'll have little as 5 to 10 years to get this job done. We're talking icebreakers, we're talking the high north, and what the strategy is for the Arctic as well as the Antarctic. Fortunately, we've made some progress on the recapitalization of the Coast Guard's fleet of heavy icebreakers. That's good news. The bad news, however, delivered recently by the Government Accounting Office, indicates that perhaps the Coast Guard's business case for the acquisition of the lead ship's Coast Guard icebreakers has serious risks, especially with certain design assumptions and an over-optimistic schedule. I'm not sure I agree with the GAO. I'd love to hear your view on this, Mr. Admiral Schultz. We need to find out if the Coast Guard agrees with those recommendations. These are just 2 issues that are immediately spring to mind. There are others, and we'll get to those in the Q&A. In closing, Admiral Schultz, you've assumed command at a critical juncture in the Coast Guard's history, a time when the service is midstream in the most expensive and far-reaching recapitalization in its history. while simultaneously being forced to stay ahead of the many turbulent, shifting economic security challenges, as well as the environmental challenges that confront not only the Coast Guard but the world. Admiral Schultz, your call to build a Coast Guard that is ready, relevant, and responsive, the 3 Rs, is both admirable and aspirational. Moreover, such principles are completely on target with the demands that you have acquired and inherited as the 26th Commandant. It's my expectation that you will infuse those principles into the Coast Guard during your watch, and to that end, we'll help you. Thank you. Yield back.
Our witness today is Admiral Carl L. Schultz, who assumed